The telegram arrived at the Bozeman Asylum on a Tuesday morning in August 1882, carried by a nervous clerk who wouldn't meet Dr. Whitmore's eyes as he delivered it. "They want someone gone," the clerk muttered, backing toward the door. "The family's paid triple to have her taken away permanent-like." Dr. Whitmore adjusted his spectacles and read the message twice, his thin lips pressing into a disapproving line. The Henderson family wanted their daughter removed from civilized society, declaring her unfit for proper company, dangerous even. The telegram spoke of delusions, violent outbursts, and an incident involving fire. They were willing to pay handsomely for her permanent institutionalization, no questions asked, no visits planned. He walked down the narrow corridor to the isolation wing, his footsteps echoing against the bare walls. The woman in question sat in a corner cell, her dark auburn hair hanging in tangled waves past her shoulders, her green eyes fixed on the small barred window that showed a strip of Montana sky. She wore a plain gray dress that hung loose on her thin frame, and her hands were folded calmly in her lap despite the restraints that had been removed only that morning. "Miss Dahlia Kimball," he said, stopping outside her cell. She turned to look at him, and he was struck by how clear her gaze was, how present she seemed. In his 20 years running this facility, he had seen true madness in all its forms. What he saw in this young woman's eyes was not insanity, but something else entirely: intelligence, defiance, and beneath it all, a deep well of hurt. "They've decided your fate," he continued, unlocking the cell door. "Your family wants you gone for good." "They wanted me gone the moment I refused to marry Mayor Henderson's son," Dahlia replied, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "I suppose setting fire to my wedding dress was the excuse they needed." Dr. Whitmore studied her for a long moment. "Did you set the fire?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I would rather burn than be sold to a man who beat his last wife to death." Her green eyes met his without flinching. "Does that make me crazy, Doctor?" He thought of the reports he had received, the exaggerated claims, the convenient timing. He thought of the bruises he had noted on her arms when she first arrived, bruises that had nothing to do with restraints. He thought of the $3,000 the Henderson family had wired to ensure their problem disappeared forever. "By their definition, perhaps," he said quietly. "But by mine, no." He returned to his office and spent the next hour writing. When he finished, he had 2 documents prepared. The first was a formal declaration of insanity, signed and sealed, exactly what the Henderson family had paid for. The second was a letter, sealed in a separate envelope, containing the truth as he understood it. Then he did something he had never done in his entire career. He sent word to the mountains. Fletcher Harrison received the message 6 days later at his cabin 15 miles north of Bozeman, high in the Bridger Range, where the pine trees grew thick and the nearest neighbor was a 2-day ride away. The messenger was a young Crow man named Running Deer, who had guided the doctor's courier up the treacherous mountain path. "Doctor says he has something for you," Running Deer explained in careful English. "Says you might be the only man with the space and the spine for what he's offering." Fletcher stood in the doorway of his cabin, all 6 feet 4 inches of him filling the frame. His shoulders were broad from years of chopping wood and hauling game, his arms, thick with muscle, earned through survival in one of the harshest environments in Montana. His dark brown hair fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was neatly trimmed despite his isolation. His gray eyes, the color of storm clouds, studied the messenger with cautious interest. "What kind of something?" he asked, his voice deep and rough from disuse. He spoke to Running Deer perhaps once a month, to the occasional trapper or hunter even less frequently. He had left civilization behind 5 years ago after watching his parents die in a typhoid outbreak that swept through Helena. He had no desire to return to a world that took everything and gave back only grief. "A woman," Running Deer said. "One they say is mad." Fletcher's expression hardened. "I'm not a jailer." "Doctor says she's not mad, says she needs somewhere the world can't reach her. Says you might understand that." Running Deer handed him the sealed letter. "He says to read this before you decide." Fletcher took the letter but didn't open it immediately. "Why would he think I'd want a woman here?" "Maybe because you're the only man he knows who won't use her or hurt her or hand her back to the people who want her dead." Running Deer's dark eyes were serious. "He says she needs protection, not a prison. Says you're the difference." After Running Deer left, Fletcher sat on his porch and opened the letter. Dr. Whitmore's handwriting was precise and careful, laying out the situation in clear terms. Dahlia Kimball was 22 years old, perfectly sane, and in danger. Her family wanted her institutionalized permanently to prevent scandal and to force through a politically advantageous marriage to a violent man. The doctor had signed the papers they wanted, but he was offering Fletcher an alternative. Take the woman, keep her safe, give her a chance at a life away from those who would destroy her. I know you, Fletcher Harrison, the letter concluded. Your father was a good man who treated my late wife when no other doctor would touch her because we had no money. You were raised with honor, and I've heard you still help the Crow families up in the mountains, still leave game for the widow McAllister down in the valley. You're no hermit by nature, only by necessity. If you can find it in yourself to help this young woman, I'll sleep better knowing she's under your protection rather than locked in a cell for crimes she didn't commit. If you refuse, I'll understand. But I had to ask. Bring your answer in 3 days. Fletcher read the letter twice more as the sun set behind the mountains. He thought about the silence of his cabin, broken only by the wind and the occasional call of an eagle. He thought about the life he had built here, solitary and simple, free from the complications of human society. He thought about a woman with auburn hair and green eyes, locked in a cell for the crime of refusing to be a victim. 3 days later, he rode down to Bozeman. The asylum was a grim brick building on the edge of town, surrounded by a high fence and watched by guards who looked more like prison wardens than medical staff. Fletcher tied his horse outside and found Dr. Whitmore waiting in his office, the older man's face showing relief when Fletcher entered. You came, the doctor said. I came. Doesn't mean I'm saying yes. Fair enough. Do you want to meet her first? Fletcher nodded, and the doctor led him down to the isolation wing. Dahlia was standing by the window when they arrived, and she turned at the sound of their footsteps. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw Fletcher, taking in his size, his mountain-worn clothes, the hunting knife at his belt. He saw the fear flash across her face before she controlled it, squaring her shoulders and lifting her chin. Miss Kimball, this is Fletcher Harrison, Dr. Whitmore said. He might be willing to offer you an alternative to staying here. What kind of alternative? She asked, her voice wary. Fletcher studied her openly, seeing the signs of her imprisonment in the hollows beneath her eyes, the thinness of her wrists, the way she held herself ready to fight or flee. But he also saw strength in the set of her jaw, intelligence in her sharp gaze, and a fierce determination that reminded him of a cornered wolf, dangerous not from madness, but from the will to survive. I live in the mountains, he said bluntly. 15 miles from town, middle of nowhere, no neighbors, no comforts. I hunt, I trap, I keep to myself. The doctor thinks you might be safer there than here. Safer locked in a cabin in the wilderness? She asked, her tone sharp. Not locked, not a prisoner, but not free to leave either, not at first. Your family thinks you're insane, and if they see you walking around Bozeman, they'll find a way to put you back in here or worse. He crossed his arms, his muscles flexing beneath his worn shirt. Up there, you'd be beyond their reach. You'd work for your keep, help with the daily tasks, learn to survive in the mountains. I won't hurt you, won't touch you, won't make demands beyond honest labor. But it would be hard, and it would be isolated, and you'd have to trust me to keep you safe. Dahlia looked between Fletcher and the doctor, her mind clearly racing through the options. And if I say no? Then you stay here, Dr. Whitmore said gently. I've signed the papers your family wanted. Officially, you're declared insane and committed indefinitely. I did it to protect you from being sent somewhere worse, but it means you have no legal standing, no rights, no voice. If Fletcher takes you, at least you have a chance at something resembling a life. Some choice, she said bitterly. Best one I can offer, the doctor replied. Fletcher saw the moment she made her decision, saw the fear in her eyes transform into something harder, more resolved. She turned to face him fully, meeting his gaze without flinching. If I go with you, will you give me your word that you won't hurt me? That you won't force yourself on me or hand me back to my family? You have my word, Fletcher said. I'm not a gentleman, Miss Kimball, and I'm not good company. But I'm not a monster. You'll be safe with me, or I'm not worth the name my father gave me. She studied him for another long moment, then nodded once. Then I'll go. Dr. Whitmore exhaled in obvious relief. I'll prepare the papers. Officially, you're being transferred to a private facility for specialized treatment. The Henderson family has already paid for your care, so they won't question it. As far as anyone knows, Dahlia Kimball has disappeared into the medical system, never to be seen again." "Good," Dahlia said softly. "Let them think I'm gone." 2 hours later, as the sun climbed toward noon, Fletcher helped Dahlia onto his horse and swung up behind her. She stiffened at the contact, and he kept his hands carefully positioned on the reins, giving her as much space as possible while still keeping her secure. Dr. Whitmore had provided her with warmer clothes, practical traveling gear that would serve her better than the asylum dress, and a small pack of supplies. "Be safe," the doctor said, looking up at them. "And Miss Kimball, if you ever need anything, send word through Running Deer. He knows how to find me." "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." They rode north, leaving Bozeman behind. Fletcher kept the pace steady but not punishing, aware that Dahlia had been confined for weeks and wasn't used to riding. She sat stiffly in front of him, her body tense, her hands gripping the saddle horn. He could feel her trembling slightly, whether from fear or cold or exhaustion, he couldn't tell. "There's a blanket in the left saddlebag if you need it," he said after an hour of silence. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice clipped. "Suit yourself." They rode for another hour before she finally spoke again. "Why did you agree to this?" Fletcher considered the question. "Dr. Whitmore is a good man. He asked for help. Seemed like the right thing to do." "You don't even know me." "No, but I know what it's like to want to be left alone by a world that won't let you be." She glanced back at him, her green eyes searching his face. "Is that why you live in the mountains? Because the world hurt you?" "The world took everything I loved," he said simply. "Seemed easier to leave than to stay and watch it take more." They rode in silence after that, climbing higher into the Bridger Range as the afternoon wore on. The trail grew narrow and treacherous, winding through dense pine forests and along steep ridges that dropped away into dizzying valleys. Dahlia's tension gradually eased as the miles passed, her body relaxing against the rhythm of the horse's gait, though Fletcher noticed she kept her gaze fixed forward, never looking at the drops beside the trail. "Are you afraid of heights?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted, "but I'm more afraid of what's behind us than what's ahead." "Smart woman." By the time they reached his cabin, the sun was setting behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines, a solid structure built from logs Fletcher had cut and shaped himself. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, and he realized with a start that Running Deer must have come ahead to light the fire and prepare the place. Fletcher dismounted first, then helped Dahlia down. She stood unsteadily, her legs shaking from the long ride, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow until she found her balance. "Inside," he said. "Warm yourself by the fire. I'll tend the horse and bring in the supplies." She nodded and walked toward the cabin, moving slowly, and Fletcher watched until she was safely inside before turning to his horse. The animal nickered softly, tired from the journey, and Fletcher stroked its neck while he removed the saddle and gear. When he entered the cabin 15 minutes later, arms loaded with supplies, he found Dahlia standing in the middle of the single large room, looking around with an expression he couldn't quite read. The space was simple but well built, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall, a rough-hewn table and chairs in the center, and a sleeping area separated by a curtain in the back corner. Shelves lined the walls, filled with tools, supplies, and the few books Fletcher owned. A ladder led to a small loft where he stored furs and dried meat. "There's only one bed," Dahlia said, her voice carefully neutral. "You'll take it," Fletcher replied, setting down the supplies. "I'll sleep in the loft for now. Once the weather turns cold, I'll rig another sleeping area down here by the fire." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you." He nodded toward the shelves. "Food is there. Help yourself to whatever you need. Water barrel is by the door, fed by a spring that runs year-round. Privy is out back, about 20 yards. There's a rifle above the mantel and a pistol in the drawer by the bed. You know how to shoot?" "No." "Then I'll teach you. Up here, you need to know how to defend yourself, if not from men, then from wolves or bears." He moved to the fireplace and added another log. "Rules are simple. You pull your weight, help with the work, and don't wander off alone until you know the land. I'll treat you with respect, and I expect the same. We're partners in survival up here. Nothing more, nothing less. Understood? Understood, she said softly. Fletcher prepared a simple meal of venison stew and cornbread, the ingredients already laid out thanks to Running Deer's foresight. They ate in awkward silence, sitting across from each other at the table, both aware of the strangeness of the situation. Dahlia ate slowly, as if her stomach had forgotten how to handle real food after weeks of asylum fare. It's good, she said after a while. The stew, it's good. Basic, Fletcher replied, but it keeps a body going. Better than what they fed us in that place. She set down her spoon and looked at him directly. I want you to know something. I'm not crazy. Everything I did for a reason. I know. You believe me? Just like that? The doctor believed you. That's enough for me. And I've met the Henderson family. If they're involved, I'm inclined to think you were in the right. A small, bitter smile crossed her face. Thomas Henderson tried to court me properly at first. Flowers, poetry, the whole performance. But I saw how his servants flinched when he passed, how his dogs cowered. I saw the bruises on the wrists of the women who worked in his house. When I refused him, my father was furious. He said I was throwing away the family's chance at political connections. He said I was selfish and foolish. And when you still refused? They tried to force me, locked me in my room, said I'd stay there until I came to my senses. Thomas came to visit one night, drunk, and he made it very clear what he expected from a wife. He tried to make me understand through force. Her voice shook slightly, but she kept her gaze steady. I fought him off with a fireplace poker, broke his nose. My father said I was hysterical, delusional. The next day, they delivered my wedding dress, so I burned it in the front yard and told the whole town exactly why. Fletcher's jaw tightened. And they called you mad for it. They called me worse. Thomas's father is the mayor. My father is a prominent banker. Together, they decided the easiest solution was to have me declared insane and locked away where I couldn't embarrass them anymore. She wrapped her arms around herself. I thought I'd die in that place. Or worse, that they'd keep me there until I actually did go mad. You're out now, Fletcher said, and as long as you're here, they can't touch you. But I can never go back either, can I? Never see my mother or my sister, never have a normal life. No, he said honestly. You can't. This is what freedom costs you now. Isolation in exchange for safety. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back angrily. It's not fair. No, it's not. But fair stopped mattering the moment they locked you up. She nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. I'll do my share of the work. I'll learn whatever I need to learn. I won't be a burden to you. I don't think you could be a burden if you tried, Miss Kimball. You've got too much fight in you. Call me Dahlia, she said. If we're going to be living here together, you should call me Dahlia. Dahlia, he agreed, and I'm Fletcher. That first night, Dahlia slept in the bed behind the curtain while Fletcher climbed to the loft. He lay awake for hours, listening to her quiet breathing, wondering what he had gotten himself into. He had built this life to be alone, to avoid the complications of human connection, the inevitable pain of loss. Now, he had brought a woman into his sanctuary, a woman who was damaged and angry and vulnerable, and he had no idea how to navigate the situation. But as the hours passed and he heard her breathing even out into true sleep, deep and untroubled for perhaps the first time in weeks, he felt something shift in his chest, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in 5 long years. Maybe the doctor had been right. Maybe they both needed this in different ways. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Fletcher woke before dawn, as was his habit, and started the fire and prepared coffee. Dahlia rose shortly after, still pale and thin but growing stronger each day. He taught her the basics of mountain survival, starting with how to maintain the fire, how to fetch water from the spring, how to prepare and preserve meat. She proved to be a quick learner, absorbing his instructions with fierce concentration. Her hands, soft from a life of privilege, grew calloused from work. Her body, weakened by confinement, began to rebuild muscle and stamina. She never complained, even when the tasks were difficult or unpleasant, and Fletcher found himself respecting her more with each passing day. 2 weeks after her arrival, he took her out to teach her to shoot. They walked to a clearing about half a mile from the cabin, where he had set up targets against a fallen log. He handed her the rifle, showing her how to hold it, how to sight down the barrel, how to control her breathing before pulling the trigger. It's going to kick, he warned. Brace yourself. She nodded and took aim at the nearest target, a piece of wood with a circle scratched into it. The first shot went wide, the recoil nearly knocking her backward. Fletcher steadied her with a hand on her shoulder, his touch brief and impersonal. "Again," he said. "Keep your stance wider. Lean into it." She fired 5 more times, each shot getting closer to the target. On the 7th attempt, she hit the edge of the circle, and a fierce grin spread across her face. "I did it! You did!" Fletcher agreed, and he couldn't help but return her smile. "Keep practicing. Up here, being able to shoot might save your life someday." They spent another hour at target practice, and by the end, Dahlia was hitting the center of the circle more often than not. As they walked back to the cabin, she seemed lighter somehow, more at ease. "Thank you," she said, "for teaching me, for giving me a chance to be something more than a victim." "You were never a victim," Fletcher replied. "Victims don't fight back. You're a survivor, Dahlia. There's a difference." She looked up at him, and something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of kindred spirits. They were both survivors, both shaped by pain into something harder and stronger than they had been before. As autumn settled over the mountains, the work intensified. They had to prepare for winter, which came early and harsh at this altitude. Fletcher taught Dahlia how to cure meat, how to store vegetables in the root cellar he had dug beneath the cabin, how to chop wood and stack it properly so it would stay dry. She worked alongside him from dawn to dusk, matching his pace as best she could. One evening in late September, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Dahlia asked the question that had clearly been weighing on her mind for weeks. "Do you ever get lonely up here?" Fletcher considered his answer carefully. "I used to think I preferred loneliness to the alternative. After my parents died, everyone I knew in Helena looked at me with pity. They wanted to help, wanted to comfort me, but all I could see in their eyes was the reminder of what I'd lost. I came up here to escape that, to escape feeling anything at all." "And did it work?" "For a while. The work kept me busy, and the silence was a relief after the noise of town. But loneliness has a way of creeping in, doesn't it? It's subtle at first, then it becomes its own kind of pain." "Yes," she said softly. "I know exactly what you mean. Even before they locked me up, I felt lonely. My family cared more about appearances than about me. My friends abandoned me the moment scandal touched my name. I thought being alone was the worst thing that could happen to me. Then I learned that being surrounded by people who wish you harm is far worse." Fletcher looked at her across the firelight, seeing the way the flames cast dancing shadows across her face, highlighting the sharp intelligence in her green eyes, the stubborn set of her mouth. She had changed in the weeks since her arrival, growing stronger and more confident, but there was still a vulnerability about her that made something protective rise in his chest. "You're not alone anymore," he said, "for whatever that's worth." "It's worth everything," she replied, and the sincerity in her voice made his breath catch. Winter arrived in early October with a snowstorm that lasted 3 days, burying the cabin under 2 feet of fresh powder. Fletcher and Dahlia were trapped inside, and the enforced proximity made them both acutely aware of each other. Fletcher found himself noticing small things about her, the way she hummed while she worked, the fierce concentration on her face when she read one of his books, the sound of her laugh when he told her stories about his misadventures learning to survive in the mountains. Dahlia, for her part, found herself watching Fletcher when she thought he wasn't looking. She noticed the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt when he added wood to the fire, the gentleness in his large hands when he carved new handles for their tools, the rare but genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. She felt safe with him in a way she had never felt safe with any man, and that safety was slowly transforming into something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified her. On the 3rd night of the storm, with the wind howling outside and the cabin warm from the fire, they sat together at the table, playing cards by lamplight. Dahlia had just won her 5th hand in a row when Fletcher tossed down his cards in mock defeat. "You're cheating," he accused, but his eyes were bright with amusement. "I am not," she protested, laughing. "You're just a terrible card player." "I've been hustled by a city girl," he said, shaking his head. "My reputation as a mountain man is ruined." "What reputation? The only people who know you exist are Dr. Whitmore running deer and me." "Exactly. And now you'll tell them I can't win at cards." She laughed again, the sound filling the cabin with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Fletcher found himself leaning forward, drawn by that laugh, by the light in her eyes, by the way she looked at him without fear or pity or expectation. "Dahlia," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Yes?" He reached across the table and gently took her hand in his calloused palm rough against her skin. "I need to tell you something." Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. "What is it?" "I'm not good at this, at talking about feelings or making pretty speeches. But these past 2 months, having you here, it's changed something in me. I thought I wanted to be alone forever, thought I was better off as a hermit, keeping the world at bay. But you've made me remember what it's like to care about someone, to look forward to each day because of the person I'll spend it with." Dahlia's eyes widened, and he saw hope and fear warring in her expression. "Fletcher, I know this isn't fair to you," he continued. "You didn't ask to be brought here, didn't ask to be stuck in the middle of nowhere with a man who barely knows how to be around people anymore. But I need you to know that if you wanted to leave, if you wanted me to take you somewhere else, help you start over in a different town where no one knows your name, I'd do it, even though it would tear me apart to lose you." "I don't want to leave," she said quickly, her hand tightening around his. "Fletcher, I don't want to leave." "You don't?" She shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. "I was so angry when Dr. Whitmore first told me about you, angry that my only choice was between one kind of prison and another. But this isn't a prison. You've given me freedom I never had, even before my family tried to destroy me. You've taught me to be strong, to be capable, to survive on my own terms. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing this cabin as a refuge and started seeing it as home. Not because of where it is, but because you're here." Fletcher stood slowly, moving around the table, never breaking eye contact with her. When he reached her side, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "Dahlia Kimball, are you telling me you might be crazy enough to love a hermit?" A shaky laugh escaped her. "I think I already do love you, Fletcher Harrison. Is that crazy? If it is, then I'm crazy too." He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, to tell him no. But she didn't. Instead, she rose to meet him, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, and when their lips finally met, it was like coming home after a long, difficult journey. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape and taste of each other. Then Dahlia made a soft sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer, and Fletcher's control wavered. He deepened the kiss, one hand sliding into her hair while the other wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his body. She fit perfectly against him, soft where he was hard, yielding where he was unyielding. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me if I'm moving too fast. Tell me if you need me to slow down." "Don't slow down," she whispered. "I've been waiting for you to kiss me for weeks." "Weeks?" "Weeks," she confirmed. "I thought I was imagining the way you looked at me sometimes, the way you'd find excuses to touch my hand or stand close to me. I was too afraid to hope it meant what I wanted it to mean." "It meant exactly that," he said roughly. "I've been trying so hard to be honorable, to give you space, to not take advantage of the situation. But God, Dahlia, you've been driving me crazy. Every morning I wake up and know you're just on the other side of that curtain, and every night I lie awake in the loft imagining what it would be like to hold you, to—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "I should stop talking." "No," she said, her green eyes dark with something that made his pulse race. "Don't stop. Tell me what you imagine." "Dahlia, I want to know. I need to know that what I feel isn't one-sided, that when I lie in that bed at night thinking about you, you're thinking about me too." Fletcher groaned, his resolve crumbling. "I think about you constantly. I think about how your hair would feel spread across my pillow. I think about kissing every inch of your skin. I think about making you mine in every way possible. But I also think about protecting you, cherishing you, building a life with you that's worth all the hell you've been through." He pulled back slightly to look at her face. "I don't just want one night with you, Dahlia. I want forever. But I won't rush you into anything. We have time." "What if I don't want to wait?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I've already made up my mind that you're the man I want? The man I trust with my heart and my body and my future?" Then I'd say we should do this properly. Let me court you the way you deserve to be courted. Let me prove to you that I'm worthy of the gift you're offering." She smiled up at him, her eyes shining. "You already have proven it, Fletcher, every single day. But if you want to court me properly, I won't stop you." Over the following weeks, Fletcher did exactly that. Despite the isolation of their location, despite the work that consumed their days, he found ways to make Dahlia feel cherished. He carved her a beautiful hair comb from elk antler, the surface polished smooth and decorated with delicate designs. He took her on walks through the snow-covered forest, showing her the secret places he had discovered during his years in the mountains, the frozen waterfalls and hidden meadows that looked like something from a fairy tale. He taught her to ice fish on the frozen creek, both of them huddled together for warmth in the bitter cold, laughing when she caught her first trout and nearly fell through the ice in her excitement. He read to her in the evenings, his deep voice bringing life to the adventure stories and poetry collections that made up his small library. And he kissed her often, sweet kisses that gradually grew more heated, more desperate, until they were both aching with want but held back by Fletcher's determination to do things right. In late November, as the first major blizzard of the season approached, Fletcher rode down to see running deer. He returned the next day with a small box in his saddlebag, and that evening, after dinner, he took Dahlia's hand and led her outside. The sky was clear for once, stars blazing overhead in the thin mountain air, the temperature well below freezing. Dahlia shivered despite her heavy coat, and Fletcher pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "See that constellation there," he said, pointing. "That's Cassiopeia. My mother used to tell me that it was a queen who was so beautiful she angered the gods and they placed her in the sky as punishment, but I always thought it looked more like a promise, a reminder that even the most powerful forces in the universe can't destroy true beauty." "That's lovely," Dahlia said, leaning back against his chest. "You're lovely," he replied, "and strong and brave and everything I never knew I needed." He turned her in his arms so she faced him, her back to the cabin, her face illuminated by starlight. "Dahlia Kimball, I know we've only known each other a few months. I know the circumstances that brought us together were far from ideal. But I also know that I love you with everything I am. I love your strength and your spirit. I love the way you laugh when you beat me at cards. I love the way you hum while you work and the way you've made this cabin feel like a home instead of just a place to survive." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small box, opening it to reveal a simple gold band. "This was my grandmother's ring. It's the only thing of value I brought with me when I left Helena. I've been carrying it for years, never thinking I'd have someone to give it to, but now I do." He dropped to one knee in the snow, looking up at her with his heart in his eyes. "Dahlia, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice in loving this hermit?" Tears streamed down Dahlia's face, freezing on her cheeks in the bitter cold. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Fletcher, I'll marry you. I love you so much." He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her with a passion that warmed them both despite the freezing temperature. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and laughing, he swept her up in his arms and carried her back inside. "We'll have to wait until spring to make it official," he said, setting her down by the fire. "Can't get a preacher up here until the snow melts." "I don't need a preacher to know I'm yours," Dahlia replied, reaching up to cup his face. "In my heart, we're already married. But I'll wait for spring if you want it done properly." "I want everything done right for you," Fletcher said. "No more corners cut, no more being forced into situations you don't control. From now on, we do things together, as partners." "As partners," she agreed. "And as lovers?" His eyes darkened. "Are you sure? We can still wait." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She took his hand and led him toward the curtained sleeping area. "Make love to me, Fletcher. Make me truly yours." He followed her behind the curtain, his heart pounding. In the soft light from the single lamp, he helped her undress, his hands reverent as he revealed each new inch of her skin. She was beautiful, more beautiful than anything he had ever seen, and when she reached for him, helping him remove his own clothes with trembling hands, he felt a rush of emotion so powerful it nearly drove him to his knees. They came together slowly, carefully, Fletcher determined to make her first time as gentle and pleasurable as possible. He kissed every inch of her skin, learning what made her gasp and moan, building her pleasure until she was writhing beneath him, begging for more. When he finally made her fully his, joining their bodies as completely as their hearts were already joined, she cried out his name, and he swore he could feel his entire world shift and realign around this moment, this woman. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Dahlia's head on Fletcher's chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. She traced patterns on his skin, marveling at the feel of him, the solid reality of this man who had saved her in every way that mattered. "I never thought I could feel this way," she whispered, "so safe and so wild at the same time." "That's how you make me feel too," Fletcher replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Like I could conquer the world or burn it down, whichever you needed me to do." "I don't need you to conquer or burn anything," she said with a soft laugh. "I just need you to love me." "That," he said firmly, "I can absolutely do." Winter deepened, and they weathered it together, learning each other in every sense of the word. They made love frequently, discovering the ways their bodies fit together, the rhythms and patterns that brought them both to heights of pleasure. But they also built something deeper, a partnership rooted in mutual respect and understanding. Dahlia proved herself invaluable in ways Fletcher hadn't expected. She had a head for numbers and organization, and she helped him plan their supplies and hunting schedules more efficiently than he had ever managed alone. She also had a creative streak, making their cabin more comfortable with small touches, curtains for the windows, cushions for the chairs, decorative carvings that turned functional items into art. Fletcher, in turn, continued to teach her the skills she needed to survive in the mountains. By the time January arrived, she could shoot as well as he could, track game through the snow, set snares for rabbits, and navigate by the stars. She was no longer the city girl who had arrived at his cabin, frightened and uncertain. She was a mountain woman now, strong and capable and utterly fearless. In February, Running Deer arrived during a break in the weather, bringing supplies from town and news of the outside world. He smiled broadly when he saw how comfortable Dahlia and Fletcher were together, the easy intimacy between them obvious in every gesture. "The doctor will be pleased," Running Deer said. "He worried that you might both be too damaged to find happiness." "Tell him we proved him wrong," Fletcher replied, his arm around Dahlia's waist. "The Henderson family has stopped asking about Miss Kimball," Running Deer continued. "They believe she died in the asylum. Dr. Whitmore sent them official papers confirming it. As far as the world knows, Dahlia Kimball is gone." Dahlia felt a pang at that news, grief for the life and the family she had lost. But when Fletcher's arm tightened around her, offering comfort and support, the grief faded. She had a new life now, a better life, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. "Good," she said firmly. "Let that version of me stay dead. I'm someone new now." "Dahlia Harrison soon enough," Fletcher said, and Running Deer laughed. "About that," the Crow Man said. "I spoke to Father Michaels in town. He says if you can get down to Bozeman by early April, he'll perform the ceremony. The doctor has offered his home for the wedding." Fletcher looked at Dahlia. "What do you think? Can you face going back to town?" "With you beside me, I can face anything," she replied. They spent the rest of the winter preparing for their trip down the mountain and planning for their future. Fletcher wanted to expand the cabin, adding another room for when they had children. Dahlia wanted to start a small garden in the spring, growing vegetables to supplement their diet of game meat. They talked for hours about their dreams and plans, building a vision of the life they would create together. In late March, as the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared in the valleys below, they prepared for their journey to Bozeman. Dahlia was nervous about returning to civilization, even briefly, but Fletcher's presence beside her gave her courage. They rode down the mountain on a clear morning in early April, the world coming alive around them after the long winter. Flowers were beginning to bloom in the meadows, and the creeks ran high with snowmelt. It took them 2 days to reach Bozeman, camping one night under the stars, and when they finally arrived at Dr. Whitmore's house, the old man greeted them with tears in his eyes. "You both look so well," he said, embracing first Dahlia, then Fletcher. "So happy." "We are," Dahlia said simply, "because of you. Thank you for giving us this chance." The wedding took place the following day in Dr. Whitmore's parlor, with Running Deer and the doctor's housekeeper as witnesses. Father Michaels performed the ceremony with quiet dignity, And when Fletcher slipped his grandmother's ring back onto Dahlia's finger and spoke his vows, his voice was strong and sure. I, Fletcher Harrison, take you, Dahlia Kimball, to be my wife. I promise to protect you, cherish you, and love you for all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, your shelter in every storm, and your home wherever we may go. Dahlia's voice shook with emotion as she spoke her own vows. I, Dahlia Kimball, take you, Fletcher Harrison, to be my husband. I promise to stand beside you, support you, and love you with all that I am. I promise to build a life with you that honors the gift we've been given, the chance to start again, together. When Father Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed Dahlia with a tenderness that made everyone in the room smile through their tears. They were both survivors, both shaped by tragedy and pain, but they had found each other and created something beautiful from the broken pieces of their past. They stayed in Bozeman for 3 more days, long enough to purchase supplies and for Dahlia to write a letter to her younger sister, telling her that she was alive and happy, even though they could never see each other again. She asked the doctor to hold the letter, to give it to her sister only if the girl someday found herself in trouble and needed to know there was someone in the world who loved her. On their last night in town, they stayed in a hotel room, a luxury they both appreciated after months in the cabin. As they lay together in the comfortable bed, Dahlia turned to Fletcher with a serious expression. I want to tell you something, she said. I'm not sad about leaving my old life behind anymore. I thought I would be. Thought there would always be a part of me that mourned what I lost. But being here, seeing the town again, all I feel is grateful that I escaped. Grateful that you found me. I'm the one who should be grateful, Fletcher replied. You took a chance on me, on this life. You could have refused, could have told the doctor you'd rather stay in the asylum than go into the mountains with a stranger. But you weren't a stranger, not really. From the moment I saw you standing outside my cell, I knew you were different. I knew I could trust you. She kissed him softly. And I was right. They returned to the mountains the next day, riding back up into the high country where they belonged. The cabin had never looked more welcoming, and as they unpacked their supplies and settled back into their routine, both of them felt the rightness of their choice. Spring turned to summer, and they worked together to expand the cabin and plant Dahlia's garden. Fletcher built her raised beds and a fence to keep out the deer, and she planted vegetables, herbs, and wildflowers. She spent hours tending the garden, and Fletcher loved watching her work, loved seeing the joy on her face when the first seedlings pushed through the soil. In July, Dahlia realized she was pregnant. She told Fletcher one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass, his face showing wonder and fierce protectiveness. Are you happy? She asked, her own emotions too complex to name. Happy doesn't begin to cover it, he said roughly. Terrified and honored and thrilled all at once. We're going to have a baby, Dahlia, our baby. Are you afraid? She asked. Of what could happen? Women die in childbirth, especially out here, far from doctors. I'm afraid, he admitted, but I have faith in you, in us, and when the time comes, we'll get you down to Dr. Whitmore. I won't take any chances with your life or our child's. They spent the summer and fall preparing for the baby's arrival. Fletcher built a cradle from smooth pine, carving it with the same care he had once used for Dahlia's hair comb. Dahlia sewed tiny clothes from soft fabric she had purchased in Bozeman, each stitch made with love. They talked about names, argued playfully over whether they wanted a boy or girl, and dreamed about the future their child would have. In late November, as the first snows of winter began to fall, Dahlia went into labor. Fletcher had been watching her carefully for days, alert to any signs that the time was near, and as soon as her contractions began, he helped her onto his horse and started the long, treacherous ride down to Bozeman. It was the longest 2 days of his life. Dahlia was incredibly brave, never complaining even though he knew she was in terrible pain. He stopped frequently to let her rest, held her when the contractions became overwhelming, and prayed to every god he could think of that they would make it in time. They arrived at Dr. Whitmore's house just after dawn on the second day, and the doctor took immediate charge, ushering Dahlia into a bedroom he had prepared for exactly this purpose. Fletcher was banished to the hallway, where he paced for hours, listening to Dahlia's cries and feeling utterly helpless. Finally, just as the sun was setting, a baby's cry pierced the air, and Fletcher's heart nearly stopped. A moment later, Dr. Whitmore emerged, his face weary but smiling. "You have a son," he said. "A healthy, perfect son. And your wife is tired but doing well." Fletcher pushed past him into the room, his eyes finding Dahlia immediately. She lay in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but radiant as she held a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. When she looked up and saw him, her smile could have lit the entire world. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Fletcher approached slowly, almost afraid to touch them. They seemed so precious. But Dahlia shifted the baby into his arms, and he looked down at the small red face, the tiny fingers curled into fists, the eyes that blinked up at him with unfocused wonder. "He's perfect," Fletcher whispered, his voice breaking. "You're both perfect." "What should we name him?" Dahlia asked. Fletcher thought for a moment, then smiled. "How about Franklin, after my father? Franklin Harrison." "Franklin," Dahlia repeated, testing the name. "I love it. Franklin it is." They stayed with Dr. Whitmore for 2 weeks, giving Dahlia time to recover, and the baby time to grow a little stronger before they made the journey back up the mountain. The doctor doted on both mother and child, clearly delighted to have them in his home, and Running Deer visited several times, bringing gifts for the baby and congratulations for the proud parents. When they finally returned to their cabin, it was with a deep sense of contentment. Their family was complete, their home ready, their future bright with possibility. Fletcher had added a proper nursery area to the cabin while they were gone, Running Deer helping with the construction, and Dahlia arranged it lovingly, placing Franklin's cradle near the window where he could see the mountains that would be his playground. The years that followed were full of joy and hard work. Franklin grew strong and healthy, a boisterous boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's auburn hair. Fletcher taught him to track and hunt, to respect the land and the animals they depended on. Dahlia taught him to read and write, filling his head with stories and knowledge. When Franklin was 3, Dahlia gave birth to a daughter they named Faith. 2 years after that, another son they named Frederick. The cabin was expanded again and again, growing from Fletcher's original single room into a sprawling home that echoed with laughter and love. Running Deer became a frequent visitor, teaching the children about the Crow ways, telling them stories of the old days when the land was open and free. Dr. Whitmore visited each summer, bringing books and news from the outside world. The family remained isolated from mainstream society, but they were never truly alone. Dahlia sometimes thought about her old life, about the family that had tried to destroy her, about the man who had nearly forced her into a living hell. But those memories held no power over her anymore. She had built something infinitely better, a life filled with purpose and passion and profound love. Fletcher, too, found that the pain of his past had finally healed. He had lost his parents, lost the life he thought he would have, but in return, he had gained everything that truly mattered. Every morning when he woke with Dahlia in his arms, every evening when he watched his children play in front of the cabin, he felt a gratitude so deep it was almost overwhelming. One evening, 15 years after that first day when he had ridden into Bozeman to meet a woman the world called crazy, Fletcher sat on the porch with Dahlia, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Franklin was 18 now, tall and strong, every inch his father's son. Faith was 15, beautiful and intelligent, with her mother's fierce independence. Frederick was 13, quiet and thoughtful, with a gift for carving that surpassed even Fletcher's skill. "Do you ever regret it?" Fletcher asked, taking Dahlia's hand. "Choosing this life over everything else you could have had?" Dahlia looked at him with those green eyes that still made his heart skip a beat, and she smiled. "I regret nothing. You gave me freedom when the world tried to cage me. You gave me love when everyone else saw only madness. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living. How could I possibly regret any of it?" "The world still thinks you're dead," he pointed out. "Your sister grew up never knowing what happened to you. Your mother probably mourned you." "I know," she said softly, "and that's the one sorrow I carry. But my sister is married now, has children of her own, and is free from the influence of my father and the Hendersons. Dr. Whitmore tells me she's happy. That's enough for me. As for my mother, I hope she understood in her heart that I did what I had to do to survive." Fletcher pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you," he said, "more than I did 15 years ago, which I wouldn't have thought possible." "I love you too," she replied, "my hermit, my mountain man, my everything." As the stars began to appear overhead and their children's laughter rang through the valley, Fletcher reflected on the strange path that had brought them together. A doctor who had been willing to break the rules to save a life, a woman brave enough to choose the unknown over the certain horror that awaited her. A man who had learned that isolation wasn't strength, but hiding from the possibility of love was cowardice. They had all taken a chance on each other, and in doing so, had created something beautiful and lasting. The world had called Dahlia crazy, had tried to lock her away, had declared her unfit for society, but she had proven them all wrong. She wasn't crazy. She was simply brave enough to love a hermit, to build a life in the wilderness, to create happiness from the raw materials of pain and loss. And Fletcher, the man who had once believed he was better off alone, had learned that the greatest strength lay not in isolation, but in allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to care, to love with everything you had. Over the following years, their children grew and eventually started families of their own. Franklin married a Crow woman named Singing Bird, and they built a cabin 3 miles from Fletcher and Dahlia's home, close enough to help each other, but far enough for privacy. Faith married a young doctor who had come to study with Dr. Whitmore, and fell in love with both the mountains and the fierce young woman who called them home. Frederick chose to stay close to his parents, building his own small cabin on their land and spending his days perfecting his craft as a woodworker. Fletcher and Dahlia became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family grow and spread through the mountains like the wildflowers Dahlia had planted so many years ago. Their love never diminished, never grew stale or routine. They still sat together on the porch each evening, still held hands like newlyweds, still looked at each other with the same wonder and gratitude they had felt in those first difficult months. Dr. Whitmore passed away peacefully in his sleep when Dahlia was 48, and they traveled down to Bozeman for his funeral. It was the first time Dahlia had been back to town in years, and she marveled at how much it had grown, how civilized it had become. But she felt no longing to stay, no regret about the life she had chosen. She paid her respects to the man who had saved her life, then gladly returned to the mountains with Fletcher. Running Deer lived to be 93, a respected elder among his people, and he never stopped visiting the Harrison family. He was there when Fletcher's hair turned gray, when Dahlia's face developed the lines of a life well lived, when their children brought new generations into the world. And when he finally passed, it was in the cabin where he had once helped prepare for Dahlia's arrival, surrounded by the family he had helped create. As Fletcher and Dahlia grew old together, they never lost their appreciation for the gift they had been given. They had both been broken by the world, both declared unfit in different ways, she by her family, he by his own grief. But together, they had built something whole and beautiful, a legacy that would outlive them both. On a warm summer evening, when Fletcher was 72 and Dahlia was 69, they sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren were gathered in the meadow below, celebrating the birth of the newest member of the family. Laughter and music drifted up to them on the evening breeze. "We did well," Dahlia said, her hand in Fletcher's, her wedding ring worn smooth by decades of wear. "We did," Fletcher agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. Do you remember what you asked me that first day we met, when you came to the asylum? I asked if you could trust me." "No," she said with a smile. "Before that? You asked if I was crazy enough to love a hermit." Fletcher laughed, the sound deep and warm. "And you proved that you were." "I was never crazy," Dahlia said, squeezing his hand. "I was just brave enough to see that sometimes the world's version of sanity is the real madness, and that sometimes the greatest adventure is trusting a stranger to show you a better way." "Crazy or brave, I'm grateful every day that you took that chance," Fletcher replied. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for choosing me, Dahlia, for choosing this life, for giving me a reason to be more than just a man hiding from the world. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else only saw a problem to be solved," she said. "Thank you for giving me freedom and safety and love beyond measure." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Their family's voices rose in song below them, a joyful celebration of life and love and the bonds that tied them all together. Fletcher and Dahlia Harrison lived another 10 years after that perfect summer evening, dying within months of each other, as if neither could bear to exist without the other. They were buried on a hilltop overlooking their valley, their graves marked with simple stones carved by Frederick's skilled hands. But their legacy lived on in the thriving community their descendants built, in the stories told around fires on cold winter nights, in the lessons of courage and love passed down through generations. They had proven that even when the world declares you unfit, even when society tries to cage you or drive you away, there is still hope. There is still the possibility of finding someone who sees your worth, who chooses to stand beside you, who helps you build a life that honors your true self. The doctor had signed the papers declaring Dahlia crazy, and the mountain man had asked if she was crazy enough to love a hermit. But in the end, neither madness nor isolation had defined them. Love had, trust had. The courage to take a chance on each other had created something that far outlasted their individual lives, a testament to the power of two broken people choosing to heal together. And in the mountains of Montana, where the pine trees grow tall and the eagles soar overhead, their story is still told, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest question. Are you brave enough to choose a different path? Are you crazy enough to believe in the possibility of something better? Dahlia and Fletcher had answered yes to both questions, and in doing so, they had created a love that transcended time, circumstance, and the judgment of a world that had tried to break them both. Their cabin still stands, maintained by their descendants, a monument to everything they built together. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispers through the valley and the stars blaze overhead, some say you can still feel their presence there. Two souls so intertwined that not even death could separate them, forever watching over the family and the land they loved so deeply. It was a crazy story, perhaps, the tale of a woman declared insane and a hermit who lived alone in the mountains. But it was also a true story, a beautiful story, a story that proved that sometimes the world's definition of madness is simply another word for the courage to choose love over fear, freedom over captivity, and hope over despair. And that, in the end, is the sanest choice of all.